Morning. Thank you, Tzippa. In terms of simchas, want to wish a very big mazel tov to Chana Man on her grandson, Semach ben Menachem Mendel's upsherinish this week. This class is sponsored by our dear classmate, Rachi Shemtov, Kayla Rachel Bas Rivka, in honor of her Yom Haledes today. I know that everybody joins me in wishing her Arichas Yamim V'Shanim Teves, a good, long, happy, healthy, nachas and simcha and hatzlacha-filled years. Yimale Hashem kol mishalas levavech l'teva v'levracha b'toiv hanir v'hanigla. Thank you for
Thank you.
letting us share your meledes. Rachi, you want to give us some brachas?
Okay, the general bracha that Mashiach should come so that everything else will be taken care of.
Amen.
Amen, amen, Kain Yehi Ratzon.
Rivky, I don't know if it's my computer or yours, but could you be a little louder, please?
I will try my best. Does this sound better?
A little bit, yes, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Specifically, that everybody should have gesund, naches, from sich allein, that everyone's told my sister, from sich allein, from the family, tzlacha, and just happiness and
Amen.
always with gesund. We should be bring naches to the Rebbe. Amen.
Amen. V'chein lemaras mit ha'safa gdela. Today is our class, Erev Gimel Tammuz. So we're learning in the schus of our hiskashrus and hiskashrus of our families, and that we should be able to eisfer in the kavana and finish up the job of bringing Mashiach Tzidkenu, Tekef Umiyad Mamash. Today we're doing Sicha Aleph on Parshas Chukas, and just an alert that this is a complex Sicha, and please feel free to push back, ask questions, ask for clarity, and Be'ezus Hashem, I hope to be able to provide that to the best of my ability. This is a siyum, and if you look at the very end of the Sicha, the very bottom under Ha'ara 51, under footnote 51, you could see that there's an asterisk that explains that Sicha zu nemra b'kesher l'siyum ksiva sefer Torah l'kabolas pnei Mashiach erev Shabbos Kodesh Yud Shvat Tavshin Lamed. This is a Sicha that deals with the siyum of Maseches Megillah, and it was said in conjunction with the completion of the writing of the Sefer Torah that the Rebbe said was being written to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu. It was written on Friday, Yud Shvat HaGadol, Tavshin Lamed, in 1970. My mother always told us and tells us that she was there and that she was literally looking to see where is the donkey? How is Mashiach arriving? Or like, how are they going to see the Nane Shemaya Mashiach arriving through the clouds? Like, she kept looking to see, like, that's how thick the air was with anticipation. So I just wanted to kind of bring that in as we learn this Sicha.
Rivky, we were probably also there. We were 4.5.
You know, it sounds to me like my mother hired a babysitter. That's just at least I like when I was 4.5, I had another 3 siblings, and I think for this occasion, my mother might have hired a babysitter, because I think part of the story would have been how she was going nuts from all of us
Okay.
if we were all there.
Okay.
But I could be wrong, and I'm not speaking for you. I don't know what your mother
Yeah, I was the youngest, so you know.
did.
Okay.
All right, Seif Aleph. Echad hamekaymes b'shas, shebahem matzinu b'gemara dimyon v'hashva ben haTorah la'adam, one of the places in the Gemara that we find a comparison between the Torah and a human being, kimerumas beparshas Chukas, as is alluded to in our parsha, it's at the end of the first aliyah, was yesterday's chitas, where it says, Zois ha-Torah, this is the Torah, Adam ki yamas ba'ehel. And then it goes on to speak about issues of impurity that arise from the fact that a person dies in a tent. And so what's the status of everything else in the tent, the people and all the objects. So the Rebbe says that this is an allusion to comparing the Torah and a person. And one of the places where we find a comparison between a Jew and a Sefer Torah, who besiyim Maseches Megillah, is at the end of Gemara Megillah. Ha'ashva ben haTorah la'adam hi b'ribuy inyanim. The comparison between the Torah and a person is in a number of things. Beginning with the fact that just as a person is comprised of both a body and a soul, so is the Torah. And we know that a person has 248 limbs and 365 veins, or I'm not sure exactly how to translate gidim. And it's the same thing with the Torah. Sinews, yeah. Thank you. We know that the Torah teaches that there are 248 mitzvahs, there are 365 positive mitzvahs, there are 365 negative mitzvahs, and there are additional ways in which a person and the Torah are compared. Now, the Parshas Chukas, Lagabe Zeis HaTorah Adam, regarding these words in our Parsha, Hahem Shachu Adam Kiyamus Ba'el. The pasuk then goes on to say when a person dies in the tent. Val derech, and in like fashion, Teichen ha'hashva ben haTorah la'adam shemibsechet Megillah mizbar b'kesher lemisa. And in like fashion, the comparison between Torah and a person in Megillah also revolves around death. Amar Rabbi Parnech taught, Kol ha'eches sefer Torah arum nikbar arum. Anybody who holds the Torah when the Torah is bare or naked will be buried naked. V'yasera mizu. And even more than this kind of parallel, kashem shebeparshas Chukas medubar lo rak be'inyan hamisa k'shel ha'atzma ela b'kesher ledin tuma. Just like in Parshas Chukas, there's not a discussion about death qua death. The discussion is about the ritual impurity that devolves from death. Al derech zehu b'limin hanal. It's the same thing in Masechet Megillah. Shemitzad zeh shekol ha'eches sefer Torah arum nikba arum gazru tuma al yadayim. That because when a person holds or touches a sefer Torah without some kind of covering, there's Rabbi Parnech teaches that there is a punishment, and we're going to try to have to understand exactly what form this punishment takes. But because of this, the Chachamim issued a decree that af hayadayim haboim machmas sefer hoisleis satruma mishum drab Parnech. That the halacha is that if a person touches a sefer Torah and there's nothing between their hand and the sefer Torah, then there's an impurity that can make anything they touch contract impurity. For instance, truma. So if they're a kayin, they wouldn't be able, and they touch the truma, they wouldn't be able to eat it. If they're a Yisrael and they, with their hands that touch the sefer Torah, touch produce, they can't give it as truma. It becomes puzzle for truma, for the purpose of truma. Okay, so I was saying that it's not about death generally. The comparison is about the ramifications vis-a-vis ritual impurity, tuma, that arise because of death. And we might say that in this sugya, in this part of the Gemara where it talks about this concept, there is a novelty that is being taught. Hein be'inyan sefer Torah arum. it's a novelty regarding the beer state of a Sefer Torah, umimit pachat Sefer Torah, and there's a novelty regarding the covering, what we usually refer to as the mantle of the Sefer Torah, v'hein be'inyan haTorah v'hamitzvos b'yachas la'adam. And there's also a novel teaching regarding the relationship between Torah and mitzvahs and a Jew. Okay, so that's Sif Aleph, simply introducing the lay of the land, that we are focusing on the end of Gemara Megillah, Masechet Megillah. We're doing this because there is a link between that teaching and the words in our Parsha, Zais HaTorah Adam. The conventional way of reading that is that this is the Torah. This is what we have to know. This is the teaching regarding Adam ki yamas ba'el, when a person dies in a tent. But there's an explanation, and certainly in Chassidus and in other places, that Zais HaTorah Adam comes to compare Torah and a person, a Sefer Torah and a person. And soon the Rebbe is going to tell us that there's another Gemara that does that makes this comparison. We'll see that in a moment. Here, but in this first Seif, the Rebbe is telling us that it's not simply the discussion about death as much as it is about Tuma, about ritual impurity, and that from this Gemara we learn a lot of novel things about the beer status of a Torah, about the cover of a Torah, and about the relation between a Jew and Torah mitzvahs. Seif Beis. V'zeh lashon haGemara b'siyum Masechet Megillah. And here the Rebbe brings us the citation from the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Parnech, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Parnech said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kol ha'eche Sefer Torah arum nikbar arum. Anybody that touches a Sefer Torah when it is beer, without the intervening mantle or covering, is buried beer. Arum zal kedaitach? The Gemara asks, really? Is that conceivable? You're going to bury a person without shrouds? Ella ema, rather you should say, nikbar arum b'loi mitzvahs. This person is being buried without mitzvahs. B'loi mitzvahs al kedaitach? The Gemara says, really? With no mitzvahs, this person is going to be buried with no mitzvahs because they touched the Sefer Torah without a cover? Ella amar Abaya, Abaya said, nikbar arum b'loi isa mitzvah. He is buried bereft, beer of that mitzvah. Which mitzvah? It's coming. So if you don't understand which mitzvah, you didn't lose anything. It hasn't yet been explained. Vihine. Move on upashut. It's understood and it's clear. Commotion is bara beriboy mekaymes. As has been explained in many instances, in many places. Shafilu that even when a hypothetical supposition is floated, is posited in the Gemara, it's not just like, something you can disregard. Yesh makam b'seichel. Obviously, it has very good standing. Gam b'seichel HaTorah, and it has very good standing within the rubric of Torah. Shechein hamedubar hu oides tanoim va'amayroim asher kol oskam haya b'Torah. Because let's not forget for one moment, we're talking about tanoim, we're talking about amaroim, and this was their entire occupation. They studied Torah, the imkain, and so once we remind ourselves of that, pashut, it's clear she'afilu kas al kidaitach shalahem, that even a hypothetical theory or supposition or possibility that they float, ein zu svara ba'alma, it's not just stam she'ein lamakam b'Torah, that has no place in the Torah chas v'shalom, but it has to be understood. It has to be understood very well. Why would they posit something, even if in the final analysis it's rejected? But what was their svara? What were they thinking? The yeser al kain, Hare Rav Ashi, Misadra HaGemara. And just to underscore this further, Rav Ashi, who redacted the Gemara, Lo yichlil b'Gemara kol shakal v'tarya v'kos al k'daytach shenemru b'beis hamedrash. He did not at all include every possible argument that took place and every possible svara, every supposition or hypothetical scenario that was floated. No. Afal pisha move on shagam l'svaras elu shenishmitu hayamakam b'seichel atayr b'frat b'sugya sheba nemra. Even though it's understood and it goes without saying that if there was a particular argument or there was a particular idea set forth, that it had great relevance, especially to the analysis of what was being discussed then. And still, Rav Ashi did not include everything. Could you imagine if he did? The imkain, and therefore, once we understand this, Teichen svaris v'kasal kidaitach elu asher nichlalu al yidei Rav Ashi b'Gemara, move on shalayizu b'vat sheyesh lemakam b'seichel v'hasbara shel Torah, ela shehu moisif havana v'hasbara b'limut sugya misuyem zu. So once we understand that Rav Ashi curated what was going to go into the Gemara very, very carefully, we understand that not only do the different opinions have a place in Seichel and have a place in the explanation of Torah, but that even when they are rejected, but the very inclusion of these various opinions adds to the understanding and the expounding of whatever it is we are analyzing. V'yesh loimer, and the Rebbe says we could even say avgam b'maskonas halacha, that they even have bearing on how the halacha is adjudicated in final analysis. And yes, the footnotes of this sikha would be enough for us to study for a week. I am not going there. My goal is for us to be able to understand the sikha itself, but the annotations are off the charts. And so once the Rebbe reminds us of how important every svara in the Gemara is, the Rebbe says, so we have to understand. Mahin svaras hakol kasal kidaitach shenikbar arum, oy arum b'loy mitzvahs, mipnei she'eches sefer Torah arum. So then it is incumbent upon us to understand what is the thought process. What is driving these two svaras? Either that the person is buried completely naked physically, or that the person is stripped of mitzvahs. Why? Because they held the Sefer Torah without there being a cover intervening between their hand and the Sefer Torah. That's Seif base. We have to understand the differing opinions here. Gimel. B'pashtus yesh loymar. Simply, we might say, Shakol ha'eches Sefer Torah arum nikba arum, eina einish stam. We might say, look, it's not an arbitrary punishment. Ela misuvav min hachiza. It's simply a consequence of holding the Sefer Torah in inappropriate fashion. B'lashon acher, to say it differently, it's einish mida k'neged mida. It's measure for measure. Ha'adam hushva l'Sefer Torah. A person is compared to a Sefer Torah, and here the Rebbe brings a Gemara, Kedivrei HaGemara, like the Gemara teachers, Ha'emed al ha'meis, b'shas yetzias neshama, when a person is present, at the moment that the neshama departs from another person, chayav likraya. They are mechuyev to tear their clothing. And by the way, this is no longer the case and has not been for a very long time. The Chachamim rescinded this decree when they realized that people were not wanting to be around a person who might be on the cusp of death, because this was before the time that people had 8,000 articles of clothing and called their mother and said they had nothing to wear, and the mother started to cry with them. People had very little, and they couldn't afford to tear their clothing. So the Chachamim rescinded this gezerah. But the Gemara records that there is a gezerah, that if the person is present, b'shas yitzias haneshama chayiv l'kroya, they're obligated to tear their clothing. And the Gemara says further, halamaza daima, and to what is this compared? The Sefer Torah shenisrafa, that a person that witnesses a burnt Sefer Torah, chayiv l'kraya, they have to tear their clothing. Va'al kain b'derech memela. And so, as a consequence of the fact that a Torah is compared to a person, kasher eiche Sefer Torah arum, when you hold the Sefer Torah and the Sefer Torah is beer, afhu me'achar shehushva l'Sefer Torah. So then the person, because a person is compared to Sefer Torah, nikbar arum kipshutai l'loy levushim. They are buried naked, without shrouds. Ella shesvara zu nishlelas b'gemara. But the Gemara rejects this svara, rejects this theory. Arum salkadaitach. You're thinking that the person should actually be buried bare, naked? Why does the Gemara reject this? So here we're going to see an artery of the Rebbe's Torah. This runs through the Rebbe's Torah constantly. The Rebbe says, Lefisha nikba arum l'loy levushim, because a person being buried completely bare. Ruth, give me a moment. I see your hand. Give me just a moment. A person being buried completely bare. Hareza einish rak l'guf. This is a punishment for their body. V'ilu hashva ben adam l'sefer Torah halohi beikar klapei neshama. But the comparison between the Torah and a human being is in the main because of the soul. And therefore, sefer Torah arum is gam kim beikar neshama. So the punishment would have to be on the neshama, not on the body. Because the main comparison between a person and the Torah is their neshama and not their body. And so how does this punishment fit? That they're buried bare. In which way is this a punishment for the neshama? So the Rebbe says the Gemara rejects this supposition on that basis. And I just wanted to point out very quickly, because it's Erev Gimel Tammuz, like I said before, this is something that runs through the Rebbe's Torah, that there's the guf and there's the neshama. And this is true in what we categorize as olam, shana, and nefesh. It's true in space, that a space has a physical parameter and has a soul, that time has a physical parameter, as it were, and a soul, and that, of course, every person, and that you cannot separate the two from each other. And this is what the Rebbe is constantly teaching us. When you look at a person, look at them in total. Don't look at the external, at the veneer. Now, Ruth, you wanted to ask something. Okay, I'm going to keep the chat open on my screen, so in case you decide to write it. Okay. So,
Sorry, technical mistake. Sorry about that.
oh, okay, no worries. No worries, all good. Olafichach, Amru b'Gemara. So therefore, because it can't be that the punishment should only be on the guf, the Gemara says, Ela ema nikba aram b'lei mitzvahs. No, it must be that the punishment is that this person is buried without mitzvahs. Shezeu einish mida k'neged mida. This would be a punishment that is measure for measure. Kevan she'adam zeh oiches sefer Torah arum ro'iloi shehei arum min hamitzvahs v'zehu einish l'neshama. Because the person held the sefer Torah in a bare fashion, a naked fashion, without the intervention of the cover, so he is worthy of being stripped of mitzvahs. That is a punishment for the neshama. Va'al kach parach b'Gemara. And on this supposition, the Gemara questions, Arim b'lei mitzvahs al kadaitach? Really? Stripped and bare and naked of all mitzvahs is what you're thinking? Madua yinatlu mimenu kol mitzvahs. Why should you take away all the mitzvahs from this Jew? Ella Amar Abaya Nikba Orim Beloy Isam Mitzvah. So Abaya answers, it means that he will be buried stripped of that mitzvah. Still don't know what that mitzvah, but it's going to come. That's not the biggest problem here. However, but this is still not smooth. This is still not computing completely. Ilu nikudas hakushya ala svara harishona hisa bekach shenikbar orum. If the point of what the Gemara is questioning and puzzling is on the first supposition that this person is being buried naked, and that this hu einish hakashul leguf bilvad, and that this is a punishment that is really only connected to the body. The einish l'neshama is not a punishment for the soul. Shemitzida hushvu l'sefer Torah, and it is really because of the soul that a person is compared to Sefer Torah. Harei shebenusach hakushya hayu l'gemara lahatik as hateva nikbar. If this is what's bothering the Gemara, right? Because see, if Gimel begins with the Rebbe saying, well, simply, this must be what's bothering the Gemara. But then the Rebbe says, no, I'm undermining my own analysis. I'm not satisfied with it. Why? Because if this is what was really bothering the Gemara, then the Gemara would have questioned with the word nikbar orum salkadaitech, burying him naked is what you're thinking. Asher bazeh tamun ikar hakashi, because it's in the word nikbar that the real difficulty is found, is buried, as it were. And the Rebbe says not only that, uvechein miretzef hadvarim b'Gemara, and from the trajectory of the discussion in the Gemara mashma, it's understood she'ein hashakal v'tarya kan b'she'ela mihu hanenash es hagufay neshama shehu hushvisal l'sefer Torah ela klape orum teichana einesh. When you look at the full back and forth, the debate, the argument in the Gemara, you see that the focus is not on who is being punished, but rather about the content of the punishment. And therefore, we cannot apply this seemingly simple way of understanding the analysis that the Gemara is bothered by positing a punishment that would be either for the body but not for the soul, or so unfair that you strip this person of all of their mitzvahs because of one thing they did wrong. The Rebbe says, but as alluring as it might be to understand the Gemara in this way, if you look at the terminology of the Gemara, if you look at the focus of the whole argument, you see that the argument is about understanding the word arum, not about understanding what the punishment is addressing or who the punishment is addressing, but rather on the punishment itself. What kind of nakedness are we talking about, as it were? Now the Rebbe is going to bring in a taisves on this Gemara in Seif Dalet. V'hine b'negei lemaskanas haGemara orum b'loy oisa mitzvah. So, regarding the conclusion of this argument in the Gemara, and the conclusion is that this person is buried stripped of only that mitzvah that they were engaged in at the time that they were holding the Sefer Torah improperly. Isa b'taisves, the Taisves writes as follows: Yesh mefarshim mitzvahs achiza. There are mefarshim that say that this person is stripped of the mitzvah that you get when you hold a Sefer Torah. The kasha, but that's difficult. My ribusa, what is the novelty? Pshite she'ein lo schar kevon shelo asah mitzvah kahegin. It's clear and it's simple that this person wouldn't get a schar for holding the Sefer Torah because they didn't do it properly. Lekach perish Riva, therefore the Riva writes, "B'loy oisa mitzvah she'asa ba'osa sha'a," that what he's being stripped of is the mitzvah that he was doing at that time. She'im achaz Sefer Torah aron, if he held the Sefer Torah in beer fashion, v'karabai, and he was reading from it, ein lo schar min hakriya, he loses the reward for reading, for learning from the Torah. And the same would be true if he was holding it to roll it, or he was holding it to fix it. But if he held on to it with a covering, but then he gets on his right side, he is rewarded with long life, and on the left, he's rewarded with riches and with honor. That's the Tosfos, who's seeking to explain the word Eisei mitzvah. Which mitzvah is the person stripped of? Vitzarech lahaven. And now the Rebbe is going to ask two questions on the Tosfos. Aleph, Mahin hasvaros shebiyisoden shel shtei hadeyos im b'loy oisa mitzvah hainu mitzvahs achiza kedas hayesh mefarshim umizeh sherashi loy pirish moma laloshem b'loy oisa mitzvah mashma shagam l'didei yesh lefarish kepashtos lashon hagemara dahainu mitzvahs achiza. So the Rebbe says, let's understand what is driving these two opinions. If the understanding of being stripped of that mitzvah means the mitzvah of holding it, which seems to be the default, which seems to be the simple understanding. And the Rebbe says from the fact that Rashi doesn't comment on it, it means that he's accepting this. That the Yesh Mefarshim also includes Rashi. That which mitzvah is this person going to be stripped of? The mitzvah of holding it. But what's the yesod? What's the basis of this farah? Or a mitzvahs kriyas galila b'haga, or the basis of the theory or the position that this person is going to be stripped of the schar that you get from either learning the Torah or rolling the Torah or fixing the Torah, kevan sha'asan ba'esa shah, because he did it while he was holding the Sefer Torah in an improper way. And that is the position of the Riva. So the Rebbe wants to understand what's driving the two opinions that Tosfos brings down on understanding Isa mitzvah, which mitzvah the person is bereft of during burial. That's one question the Rebbe has on Tosfos. Beis, Mahi kavanas haTosfos b'siyum l'shoinei aval eichazei b'mitpachas erech yama b'mino b'smayla esha b'kaved. What is the intention of Tosfos ending by saying, but the person that holds the Sefer Torah properly with a covering is going to be rewarded, and then he cites this pasuk, which we're all familiar with because we say it by Hagba. Rebbe says, "Bepashtos ba'adavar kedei l'sayim b'tov." On a simple level, we might say that Tosfos just wants to finish up in a positive fashion, and we know that this is something that's cited over and over and over again. That you always want to end on a positive note. Okay, so simply speaking, the Tosfos wants to end on a positive note. V'lachein siyum zeh leisa b'Tosfos Shabbos. So where he makes this comment in Gemara Shabbos, he doesn't end this way. And he's going to explain why. I'll just explain why it's not there, because over there it's not the end of the Gemara, so he doesn't feel compelled to kind of finish off positively. But here we're learning the siyum, and so he wants to end off positively. But the Rebbe says no. We cannot say that this is the only reason why Taisvis brings in this pasuk. If this was the only reason why he brings in that pasuk, he could have found a different way to end positively. He could have simply say, in other words, he could have kept his comment legalistic. But then it turns literary. He goes from telling us the facts to ending off in like this really kind of lyrical way. But the person that holds the Sefer Torah properly, and he brings this pasuk. And he could have just said, but the person that holds it properly, he has a schar from reading the Torah at that time, or something like that. Without bringing in a whole new thing, pasuk min hamikra, a pasuk from Tanakh, and seemingly doesn't really connect to what's going on here. So why does Taisvas do this? Those are the two questions on the Taisvas. Hey. And we might say, again, with the characteristic modesty, the Rebbe says, V'yesh loymar, possibly this is the point. This is how we can understand it with the following explanation. And here, I once again tell you that if I was a proper instructor, I would share screen with a chart here, because the Rebbe is going to create a parallel here. Shleish hadeyos v'hasvares beperush nikba orum. The three possible ways of understanding the words buried, naked. The three possible ideas that the Gemara brings down. Danais begidra shel hamitpacha biyachas l'sefer Torah. What they really do is adjudicate the parameters of the covering vis-a-vis the Sefer Torah. Shenitan linkud by kam ifanim. The relationship between the cover of the Sefer Torah and the Sefer Torah itself can be understood in three different ways. Aleph, mitpachas einen negas lemetzius Sefer Torah atzma, elehi davar hamitaisef olav. The Sefer Torah is not absolutely integral. I'm sorry, the covering is not absolutely integral to the Sefer Torah. It's rather something tangential. It's something ancillary. It's something adjacent. And why is it there? It's there to facilitate the possibility of a person holding the Sefer Torah. Because holding a Sefer Torah has to be done with the proper respect and not done in a way that disrespects the Torah. So you could say, in other words, according to the first way of understanding the status of the cover, it's utilitarian. That's one way of understanding it, Beis. The second way, no, the covering of the Sefer Torah is not only to provide the possibility of it being held by a person properly, Ella hadavar negeya u'meisiv l'kavar haSefer Torah mitzad atzmai. But rather, forget about the person. The Torah itself needs a cover for its self-respect. Kavod Sefer Torah der shetia l'Sefer Torah mitpachas. The respect of a Torah needs or necessitates a covering. It's part of the Torah itself. It's not there in utilitarian fashion to facilitate the grasping of the Sefer Torah on the part of a person. It is part and parcel of what a Sefer Torah needs. B'signan acher, to say this a little bit differently, in a different style. Ein zerak din b'gavra. It's not just a legalistic detail in terms of the person, achizas ha'adam, the person that wants to hold the Torah, grasp the Torah, ela din b'chefza shel sefer Torah. But the din belongs to the object. The sefer Torah itself needs it. And now in the brackets, the Rebbe says, and here's another way of understanding this. Another way of understanding this, hachakira hi'im zehu inyan shlili. What we're debating here is the covering of the Sefer Torah to address something negative, that yesh bizayin kasher adam eiches Sefer Torah arum, is the covering coming to address a deficit, that there's a problem if a person holds the Sefer Torah when it's bare, when it doesn't have a cover, or are we talking about something that's positive? Because a covering adds to the general cover of the Sefer Torah. So it's not that the cover comes either in utilitarian fashion to address the needs of the person who wants to hold the Sefer Torah, or to remedy a problem. No, it's that the Sefer Torah necessitates a cover. That's part and parcel of its covered, whether or not a person wants to hold it. It's a positive aspect of the Sefer Torah. Or there's a third way of understanding the relationship between the cover of the Sefer Torah and the Sefer Torah itself. Gimel. Ein zerak nagea lecover Sefer Torah. It's not just that the mantle, the cover, is important to the Sefer Torah's covered. El hadavar karoch v'yisoidei hu be'etzem ha-Sefer Torah b'kedushasei. But rather, the mantle is integral and basic and is part and parcel. It's comprised in the Sefer Torah itself and its holiness. Just like there's a halacha that in the Sefer Torah there have to be margins on the top, on the bottom, and between the different columns. There have to be margins. Al derech zeh mitzad kedushas hasefer tzarech shetia lo mitpachat hanasit al derech gilyon hasefer chelek mimenu. And so just like there have to be margins, there has to be a mantle, there has to be a cover, and that is part and parcel of the Torah. Okay, so we have make-believe in your make-believe chart. In the 3 cells, we have the 3 relationships between the cover and the Sefer Torah itself. The first, that it's merely utilitarian, it's there to serve the purpose of the person who wants to hold the Torah. The second, that it's there to serve the kavod of the Sefer Torah. The third, that it's not about its honor. It's not about its kavod. It's absolutely integral to the holiness and the viability of the Sefer Torah itself, just as are the margins. That's how a kosher Sefer Torah is written. Seif Vav. V'hein shalosh hasvaris v'hadeya shebigemara. And once you understand the 3 ways that you can understand the relationship between the cover of the Sefer Torah and the Torah itself, now you can understand the 3 svaras, the 3 deis, the 3 opinions as to the punishment of the person who holds the Torah without the cover. Okay, that's where we're going now. So we're going down the chart to the left of the first 3 cells, and we're going to the second column, Aleph. Lefi hadeya harishayna shenikbar arum kipshutai. In accordance with the first opinion, that this person is actually going to get buried without shrouds, beli levushim, with no garments at all. Naktinon, this deya, this opinion, posits and maintains Shahamitpachat hidavar tzaddi bilvad. That the cover of the Torah is peripheral to the actual Sefer Torah. It's just ancillary. It's a side thing. It's levush l'Sefer Torah. It's a garment of the Sefer Torah. V'lachein, and therefore, in parallel fashion, ha'einish la'eches Sefer Torah arum hu shenitolim min ha'adam levushav. So what's the punishment for holding the Sefer Torah without its garment? That person is buried without his garments. Shehem mitzias nifredes mimenu, because the garment is separate from him, just like the mantle is separate from the Sefer Torah. And the clothing function mostly for the purpose of somebody who is looking at the person, or at best, to prevent the disgrace that comes from being naked. But it's not actually integral to the person. It's an overlay. That's the first svar. Okay, they're going to be buried without their clothing, just like they held the Sefer Torah without its clothing. And clothing is separate from the etzem hadavar, from what we're talking about. In the case of the mantle, it's separate from the Torah. In the case of the person, it's separate from their body. Bays. But then there's another day of how to relate or how to understand the relationship between the mantle and the Torah itself, and that is that it is part of the kavod Torah. It's not there to serve the purpose of the person who wants to hold the Torah. It's there to serve the purpose of the kavod of the Torah. Bal hadei hashniya. The second opinion, nikbar orim b'loy mitzvahs, that this person is going to be buried, bereft, naked, bare of mitzvahs. Svarasahi shemitpachat mishtayeches l'sefer Torah gufa. This opinion is driven by understanding the relationship between the cover and the Torah as being an integral relationship for the cover of the Torah, not for the purpose of helping the person who wants to hold it, but rather for the Torah itself. And therefore, in parallel fashion, the punishment for the one who holds the Sefer Torah while it's naked without a cover is that he is buried naked, bereft, stripped of mitzvahs. V'hainu, meaning, lefisha mitzvahs hein levushim lenishmas ha'adam v'l'Torah, because, as the Tanya explains, that mitzvahs are the levushim, right? The Torah that we learn is like the food that becomes part and parcel and integrated in the body, and the mitzvahs are the levushim, are garments. So, and the mitzvahs are also garments of the Torah. Okay, they are what comes out of the study of Torah. V'loy b'tor mitzios studied, and they are not marginal. They are not, tangential. They're not a sidebar. Ella mitzios hakshurim inyan haTorah gufa, but rather they are connected to the Torah itself. HaTorah inyanahu limud halachos damitzvos. What's the inyan of learning Torah? To know what to do. V'hamitzvos hein levushim shebe'emtzausam ba'is halachos haTorah l'dei kiyum b'payil. And it's only through the agency of the mitzvahs that the halachas of the Torah can come to be kept. So you can't separate the two. They're not separate from each other. And it's the same thing with a person that studies Torah and is compared to Torah. That his garments are the mitzvahs, as compared to the Torah that he's learning. So that's the second opinion as to what does it mean that the person is buried orum, bare, naked, stripped. Gimel, but there is a third way of understanding that the person is buried naked. Lefi tirutza shel Abaya, and the Gemara concludes with this opinion, but according to Abaya's understanding, nikpa orum b'loy oisam mitzvah. this person is buried without that particular mitzvah. Nimtza, kefi ha'ofen hashlishi. So according to this way of understanding, shehamitpachat ein davar nifrad hamishtayech l'sefer Torah. This is driven by the understanding that the cover is not separate from the Sefer Torah, Elihi nasis al derech chelek min ha-Sefer Torah, but it's part of the Sefer Torah. V'ledatai, and according to this opinion, it's impossible to say, according to this opinion, that this person is stripped of mitzvahs in general. Because we already concluded in the discussion about the second opinion that mitzvahs are separate from Torah. And according to Abaya, the third opinion, the cover of the Sefer Torah is one and the same with the Sefer Torah. It's as integral and as basic as the margins surrounding the words. Therefore, Abaya rejects the opinion that this is talking about burying him without the schos of any mitzvahs at all, because generally mitzvahs are separate. Because Abaya's opinion is that the cover is part and parcel of the Torah, which means that what he's being buried naked of is the mitzvah that he was doing at the time that he was holding the Sefer Torah in naked fashion, in improper fashion. And therefore, Ella Arum B'loi Oisa mitzvah. And therefore, Abaya's opinion is propelled by the third way of understanding the mitpachat, that the cover is an integral part of the Torah. It has to be mitzvah zukufa. Mitpachat shehi chelek min ha-Sefer Torah, just like we said, and we'll say in Seif Zayin, the Rebbe is going to further cement this opinion surrounding the fact that the mitpachat, that the cover is part and parcel of the Torah, that it has to be the mitzvah that is being done while he is holding the Torah. And in the brackets now, the Rebbe is going to say that through understanding this, we also understand the connection between this limud of Rav Parnech that we've been studying and the limud that comes right after that, which is Amar Rabbi Yanai Chule. Rabbi Yanai said, Mutav tigolel hamitpachat va'al yigolel sefer Torah b'toich mitpachat. It's better that you should roll the cover of the Sefer Torah around the Torah than to roll the Torah in the cover. Okay. We all know what Galila looks like, right? On Shabbos, or Yom Tov, or on a Chodesh, or on a fast day, when you're by Kriyas HaTorah, after Hagba, there's Galila. Okay. So the way we do it is we take the cover and we put it over the Sefer Torah. But you could also conceivably put the cover on a table and put the Torah into the cover. Everybody understanding what I'm trying to help you visualize? Yeah. So Rabbi Yanai said,
I understand what you're saying, but if you look at the Sephardi Sefer Torahs that they have the case, like how do they do that?
I had the same question, but I did not have a chance to look into this, but it could very well be. You look, you're going to see that the Rebbe is going to say soon that Rabbi Yanai is not saying that you're not allowed to do it. He's saying it's better. And it could be that they have some other messiah, some other way of understanding it. Okay, so the Rebbe says, the Rebbe says it's not just that both of these teachings deal with the covering of a Sefer Torah, so that's why one is put next to the other, adjacent to the other. Ela yesh kan hemshach dvarim beguf ha'inyan. But rather, there is a conceptual link between these two teachings. And what is that? Lefi hamaskana shemitpachat ena levush study l'Sefer Torah, because according to the conclusion that the cover is not just a side thing, a tangential thing to the Sefer Torah itself, and it's not even a covering for the Sefer Torah, like for its covered. If once you establish that the cover is an integral part of the Sefer Torah, you might think there's no difference in how you do it. You could either do it with putting the cover on the Sefer Torah, which would mean the Sefer Torah is the main thing and the cover is to add, or you could put the Sefer Torah in the cover because the cover is an integral part of the Sefer Torah. There's no difference. On this, Rabbi Yanai comes to teach that although there is no Isser Mamish, we're not talking about something that's an Isser. So to your question, it could be that there's a history there, that there's a reason why the Sephardim do it in that way. And again, it's a very good question. I just simply, maybe somebody else knows what the, how it came that that's their minhag. But the Rebbe is saying, Rabbi Yanai comes to teach us that although there's no Isser in doing it that way, because there is a way of understanding the cover of the Sefer Torah that it's as integral to the viability of the Sefer Torah as are the margins. But it's better it's better that you should put the cover around the Sefer Torah, because when all is said and done, at the end of all of this analysis, ein hi etzem haTorah, because ultimately the cover is not the essence of the Torah. Okay, in case your head is spinning, the Rebbe has faith in you that you can still go deeper into this. Isa b'Gemara, it says in the Gemara, Hakareya al meisei b'Shabbos, if somebody tears kriya because he is a mourner, one of his closest relatives has died, and he does this on Shabbos, although tearing is not something that you should do on Shabbos, he was mechalel Shabbos through tearing his clothing, but he did fulfill kriya. He did fulfill that mitzvah. Val pizeh. So based on that precedent, so we should see the same thing reflected here. That even though the person who holds a Gemara, who holds a Sefer Torah, without a cover, did something not correct, it's bilti ratzoi, it is not what should be done. But he still shouldn't lose the mitzvah of grasping a Torah. The avera of the way in which he held the Torah should not obviate the mitzvah of holding it in general. And this is the novelty in the third way of understanding it. Shakan ein hu mekayim es ha-mitzvah lefi shemitpachat eina mitzios nifredes meha-sefer Torah. Because in the case of tearing kriya, there's two things. There's the mitzvah of tearing kriya, lo aleinu, when it's necessary, and there's a mitzvah of Shabbos. But here, The novelty of the third approach is that the cover of the Sefer Torah is part and parcel of the Sefer Torah. He chelek min ha-Sefer Torah, v'lachein, and therefore, kasher oiches b'Sefer Torah orim b'li mitpachat, nechsar b'Sefer Torah atzma memela b'mitzvah chizah Sefer Torah. When he holds on to the Sefer Torah without a cover, the Sefer Torah itself is missing something, and therefore the mitzvah of holding on to it is obviated. Ulam ha-Taisvos lo nechel linkoy keperzeh. But the Rebbe says, but the Taisvos does not embrace this understanding. Ki lefizeh, because if you do embrace this way of thinking, tala maskona shaliba de tirutza shalabaya mishtana perish hateitzah nikbar arum, because then you will have to say that according to Abaya's understanding, you're completely changing the definition of the word nikbar arum, that the person is buried naked. And the Rebbe says you can't do that. And that's why Tosfos does not embrace this. How would you be changing the meaning? In the first two understandings of what will happen to a person that holds a Sefer Torah without the cover, the person is being punished. Something is being taken away from him. In the first understanding, his physical clothing. In the second understanding, his spiritual garments. But if you understand it, that the third understanding is that he's going to be buried without that mitzvah, because yesh chisaron b'kiyum mitzvah shaloi hu arim min mitzvah atzma, then that means that you're simply saying he's not getting punished, he is losing the schar of one mitzvah. It's a different thing. In one he's being punished, in another he's losing something. Ach mi pashtus lashon haGemara mashma, but from the simple understanding of the Gemara, it's understood. Shelafi kol shloish hadeas hageder shel nikba aram echad hu einesh. But it's understood that in all three cases, simple understanding of the Gemara is that it's a punishment, not that the mitzvah is missing something, but that there's a punishment. Hainu shenoit liminar adam davar ma ulafichach pirish riva shemashmas nikba aram beloy isa mitzvah he below also mitzvah she'asa ba'isa shah. And that's why the Riva, that's why the Tosfos brings down the Riva, who says that being buried naked means being buried without that mitzvah. It means not the mitzvah of achiza, but the schar of the mitzvah that he was doing when he was holding on to the Torah. Shem achas sefer Torah arum v'karaba ein l'schar min akriya. If he was holding on to the Sefer Torah while it was naked and he was learning, he doesn't have a schar for learning. If he was rolling it, he doesn't have the schar for rolling it. If he was fixing it, he doesn't have the schar for fixing it. But not that the achiza itself, that holding on to it, has a deficit. And he, like with the kriya, okay, so here's a little bit confusing. I want to make sure. This kriya with an aleph and kriya with an ayin. Kriya with an aleph is reading from the Torah. Kriya with an ayin is when you have to tear Rahman al-Itzlan because you lost a very close relative. So like with the kriya with an ayin in that mitzvah, where they still were mekayim the mitzvah of tearing their clothing in mourning, even though they did it on Shabbos. Same thing here. Hare mitzvah zakriya kayim b'masav. Yes, he fulfilled the mitzvah of reading, of learning Torah. But the punishment is that he doesn't get the schar for it. Now, in Sif Ches, the Rebbe is going to take us deeper And he's going to give us yet another comparison in halacha. Ba'omek yoser yesh leimar. In greater depth, we might say, Shahayesh mefarshim v'riva muchulakim gam be'etzem gidra shel mitpachat. That the two opinions that the Tosfos brings down, those two opinions are also based on their understanding regarding the legal category or the parameters of the cover of a Sefer Torah. Until now, the Rebbe brought a comparison between the three different svaros in Gemara about what the ramifications are if you hold the Sefer Torah in an improper manner. And there were three opinions, and he paralleled them to three ways of understanding the relationship between the cover of the Sefer Torah and the Sefer Torah itself. Now he's bringing a deeper understanding to the two opinions that the Tosfos brought down, and that those two opinions are likewise parallel to two different ways of understanding the legal parameters of the cover of a Sefer Torah. L'das hayesh mefarshim, in the opinion of the yesh mefarshim, which is the first opinion in Tosfos, mitpachas inyan v'chelek b'mitzias haSefer Torah bilvad. The cover relates to the form of the Sefer Torah. V'lachein zeu inyan lemitzvahs ha'achiza bilvad, and therefore it relates to holding on to the Sefer Torah. Ach ein lezeh kol shayches lemitzvahs ha'adam hakshuras l'toichen u'limatara shel Sefer Torah. But according to the Riva, he understands it that the mitpachat, the cover, is part and parcel of the content or the substance of a Sefer Torah. Not the form, but the content. And therefore, what's the ramification? What's the punishment? That you lose the schar for a mitzvah that you were doing with the content of the Sefer Torah. You were learning it. You were fixing it. You were rolling it. V'lachein efshar lefarish orim b'loy oisa mitzvah hainu mitzvahs hakriya she'oisa b'oisa shah shechein l'chriya satara ein kol shaychas l'mitpachas hasefer. And that's why they wouldn't be able to say that orim b'loy oisa mitzvah is about the mitzvah of kriya that you do while you're holding on to it. Because why would kriya have any connection to the cover of the Sefer Torah? And therefore, in the opinion of the Yesh Mefarshim, there's no way that the holding of the Sefer Torah in the wrong way could in any way impact the mitzvah of reading from the Sefer Torah. And now, in the brackets, the Rebbe brings another parallel. Al derech lashon hayerushalmi, like it says in the Yerushalmi, le'inyan hachiluk bein hakareya b'Shabbos sheyatza yedei kriya le'matzah gezula she'ena yetze ba yedei chavasa b'Pesach. The Yerushalmi compares the scenario of a person who tore kriya on Shabbos, that this person did fulfill the mitzvah of kriya, and a person who eats stolen matzah on Pesach, and he does not fulfill his obligation to eat matzah. Because taman gufa avera, because the matzah itself is forbidden. Baram hachahu avar avera, because by stealing it, hainu shezeshu avar avera b'shas hasiya eina pogim b'mitzvah zakriya. But in the case, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah with stolen matzah because the matzah itself is forbidden; it's stolen. Biram hacha, but in this case of the krihu of our avera, yes, he did an avera. He was mechal Shabbos, but the fact that he was mechal Shabbos ain't a pogim b'mitzvah zakriya. But it doesn't take away; it doesn't maim the mitzvah of kriya. You can separate the two. Aval l'das hariva, but going back to the Tosfos, but according to the second opinion in the Tosfos, the Rebbe is explaining that his opinion, which is that what does the person lose? He loses a schar for the mitzvah that he was doing when he was holding the Sefer Torah in an improper way. That is rooted in the opinion, it's rooted in the opinion that the cover of the Sefer Torah is an integral part of the Sefer Torah. You cannot separate the two. All the details of a Sefer Torah are connected one to the other. Therefore, when he held onto the Sefer Torah in an improper way while it was naked, you can't separate it like you could separate the tearing of the clothing from the fact that the tear was done on Shabbos, and that's forbidden. You can't separate the two. It's like the stolen matzah. The matzah itself became forbidden, and therefore it obviates the possibility of you fulfilling the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach with that matzah. And this is true even though there were two different actions. He was holding on to it and he was learning from it. But they are one in the same way that the stolen matzah can't be eaten on Pesach to fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah, because the matzah itself is stolen, it's forbidden. They're cemented to each other. Can't separate them. Tess, al pikol hanal, based on everything we did above, Yuvan gam mashem mamshich u'mesayim b'teisvais aval oichazay b'mitpachas oirach yamim b'mino b'smayla oisha v'chavit. Now the Rebbe is going to conclude with answering the second question that he had on Teisvais. Remember, the first question was, what drives the two opinions? And he unpacked that for us in great detail and depth. Now the Rebbe is going to go back to his second question, which is, why does Teisvais end in this flowery fashion with citing this beautiful pasuk? He could have just said, the right way to do this is to only hold a Sefer Torah when there's a cover between your hands and the Sefer Torah. Instead, he says, but the one who holds it with a cover, on the right hand, he gets long life. On the left hand, he gets riches and honor. The Rebbe says, B'divrei Chazal, in Gemara Shabbos, Mevor, it's explained, Shehapasuk arech yamim b'mino b'smayla eisha v'kavod, ka'i b'shnei sugim shebein loim de Torah. This refers to two different ways of learning Torah. L'maiminin, to those on the right or right-leaning, ba'arech yamim. Those people get longevity. They get long years. Ulemasmilim, and to the people who learn Torah in a left-leaning way, ba'oisher v'kavod. They get riches and kavod. Uperish Rashi, and Rashi says, and what does this mean? What does it mean to learn Torah right-leaning? What does it mean to learn Torah left-leaning? He says it means, ma'minin ba oiskim l'shma, masmilim shaloi l'shma. This refers to the fact that those that are described as learning Torah right-leaning are the ones that learn Torah l'shma, for the sake of learning Torah. And the ones that are left-leaning are the ones that are not learning for the sake of learning. But the Rebbe says, wait a minute, don't jump to conclusions. It's not what you think. From the fact that the Gemara says that to those who are learning in a left-leaning fashion, they're going to get rewarded with this great wealth and honor, move on. So it's self-understood. From the fact that the Gemara says that they're going to get these rewards heaped upon them, it cannot be the pedestrian form of loy lishma, because about that, the Gemara already taught us in Yuma that if a person learns Torah improperly, not lishma, the Torah becomes for them not an elixir of life, but a noxious poison. So it can't be that this is the Loy Lishma that the Gemara is talking about here. Ela l'suk sh'loy lishma sheboi gam limud zeh mevi oisher v'kavod. It's talking about some other type of Loy Lishma that brings you ample reward. V'habir b'zeh. And what's the explanation? So the Rebbe explains. Kvar nizbar kama bekama kvar nizbar kvar bekama mekaymes. It's already been explained in many places. Sh'loy lishma b'dakos, that a very subtle type of loy lishma, not your conventional loy lishma, but a very subtle type of loy lishma. Ein perush rak limud avor pniya she'ena kshura l'avodas Hashem. We're not talking here about learning Torah that is separated from your avodas Hashem, learning Torah for academic analysis or whatever. No, we're not talking about that. Ela afilu limud l'shem mitzvahs. There is a subtle loy lishma, which could be where a person is studying Torah, but he's doing it l'shem hamitzvahs. K'dei leidas hamaisa sheyason. He's doing it in order to know how he should comport himself. She's learning Torah so she can know how to live life properly as a Jew. Harehu shaloy lishma limud ze'ena l'shem haTorah. So this subtle type of Loy Lishma is also called Loy Lishma because it's not limud haTorah atzma, because it's not learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah. Ki'im l'shem ki'im hamitzvahs. Lishma bishlemos. What is the most perfect, consummate type of learning Lishma? Mashma usay. The definition of that is limud haTorah l'shem hasagas haTorah atzma. It's learning Torah for the sake of grasping the Torah itself. Al derech lashon Chazal, like the Chazal taught us, Dreish v'kabel schar. Study and you will receive a reward. It's not that you should learn in order to get the reward. But you should learn in order to make the Torah great and to strengthen it. So it's not you should study, which is for the purpose of getting a schar. It's study and you will get a schar. And this is now the spiritual way of understanding the cover of the Sefer Torah Beruchnius. Shehi kanal chelek begufa Sefer Torah. The cover of the Sefer Torah is part and parcel of the Sefer Torah. Halimud kedei leidas hamaisa sheyasun muchrachu. Learning Torah in order to know what to do is absolutely necessary. Va'adrabahu koidem l'chol limud b'Torah. Not only is it necessary, but even more, it's the first type of Torah that has to be studied. Aval adayin ein ze limud haTorah mitzad atzma. But it's still not learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah for itself. Ach meidach. But on the other hand, ein ze kasiyas hamitzvos. But it's also not like doing mitzvahs. Shehei mitzvahs b'fnei atzma milvad limud haTorah. Doing mitzvahs is a completely separate category from learning Torah. So learning Torah in order to do mitzvahs is its own category. There's learning Torah qua learning Torah for the sake of grasping Torah. There's learning Torah for the sake of learning what to do. This, the Rebbe says, is the mitpachat, is the cover of the Sefer Torah, which is as integral to the Sefer Torah as the margins, but still in all, not the actual Sefer Torah, which is why Rabbi Yanai's teaching about how to dress the Torah comes in here, right? The Rebbe taught that. And then there's a third category, and that is mitzvahs. And mitzvahs, shehin levushim hakshurim l'Torah. The mitzvahs are garments for the Torah. They are connected to the Torah. It is only through the halachas that what the Torah is teaching comes to practical fruition. אלא זוהי מציאה שהיא מלכתחילה חד עם התורה. זהו אחד מן האופנים בלימוד התורה. It is one and the same with the Torah, like the mitpachat. It's one of the ways of learning Torah. Ela shalagabe limud haTorah lishma. It's only that compared to learning Torah for its own sake, l'shem haTorah atzma, in this new understanding of lishma, which is just for the sake of grasping Hashem's Torah, halimud hu bedugmas mitpachas. This type of learning is like the cover of the Sefer Torah, v'levush, and it's like a garment, leguf va'amitas halimud, to the body and the truest, purest form of learning Torah. V'zehu shemesayim b'teisves, and this is what the Teisves concludes, shekasher eichazei b'mitpachas, when a person learns Torah, and he's holding the Torah with a cover, uba b'sha v'karabai, he's holding it with a cover and he's learning. Azai, then erech yamim b'mina b'smeila esher v'kaved. Then two things are happening. He is getting longevity on the right side, and on the left side he's getting riches and covet. Kasher yesh biyadei shnei ha'inyanim, when the Jew has both things. And now the Rebbe is going to take it to its non-literal level. Hein masmilim ba shaloi lishma. He's both studying the Torah like the left-leaning people, meaning he's studying the Torah to know what to do. Halimid al manas leitas ha'maisa sheyason. Hamirubas betir oichezem mitpachat. And this is alluded to in what the Gemara says as he's holding on to the Torah with the cover. And the cover is an integral part of the Torah. It's like the margins. And the hein v'karabai, and at the same time he's reading it, shepeirushu hu hakriyav halimud b'Torah lishma l'shem haTorah ma'aminin ba, and at the same time he's learning Torah in a right-leaning way. He's learning the Torah for the sake of learning Torah. Harei hu zeicha l'shnei inyanei haschar. Then he's zeicha to both levels, both strata of the reward. Hein erech yamim b'mina, on the right hand, on the right side, long life. The hein b'smeila esher b'kavod, and on the left, the riches and the honor. Kipshutam lematam asarat tvachim, literally in this world. Va'ad la'erech yamim ha'esher va'kavod hamitim, and until the person is zeicha to the true longevity, to the true wealth, to the true honor, the v'yas Mashiach tzidkenu b'mhera v'yameinu mamash, with the coming of Mashiach, let it be speedily in our days. This is a sikha that has to be learned a number of times to really be able to grasp all the levels. I hope and I pray that I did some type of justice to it. I wanted to just point out one other thing that's very, very basic to the Rebbe's Torah. When the Rebbe talks about the two ways of learning Torah, you see this over and over, that the Rebbe always demanded that it's not enough to do it like this, you also have to do it in a better way like that. That, yes, of course, you have to learn Torah in order to do mitzvahs properly, but you also have to do it like in the right-leaning way. You also have to learn Torah for the sake of grasping Torah. Or like in Sichas, the Rebbe says that Avodah Zarah, a very subtle understanding of Avodah Zarah, is something that is Zarah, it's alien to you, because yesterday you were on a certain level, so today, this same Avodah is Zarah for you. The Rebbe never allowing us to rest on our laurels, to even get close to the neighborhood of complacency, and always telling us that it has to be this and that. It has to be this, and it has to be more. So perhaps people want to share some things on this